Lois Conley. Welcome to Speak Up St. Louis.
Thank you, Quinton. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being so open just to the opportunity and just taking this moment with us to be able to share not only what you're working on, but all the great things that are happening here in St. Louis, the Griot, and a lot more as well. And so I guess for the folks that might not know as much about the Griot, if you wanted to just touch, do a high level on what the Griot Museum is.
Whoa, high level. Huh? It's a lot to. That's not hard. That's not easy to do it for 26 years. But yeah, so we are now in our 26th year here in St. Louis. Opened in 1997. We're located at 2505 St. Louis Avenue, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from where we are today. If you haven't been, raise your hand. No, don't raise your hand. But if you haven't been, you need to come. I think you will enjoy it. It's a great experience. But we've been here now 26 years, and we just focus. The museum was designed to focus on mostly the people and events of this region. When you go to a lot of cultural institutions, you hear about the kind of big national people. And we wanted to talk about the stories that were relevant to the folks who lived here and to be able to share those stories with folks who come into our city to visit. And that's what we've been doing for the last 25 years. So people that you see and events that you'll see are stories about people who were either born in the area or spent some significant time in the area, or maybe they just did something of note while they were passing through. We started out in a very minimal, nominal level with like 5 or so really sparse exhibits. And because we're a grassroots organization that has operated almost all of this time without any major corporate or foundation support, we've just gradually and slowly but consistently grown the museum in many ways. We purchased a building that was built in 1916. It's a beautiful building, an old Catholic school. Still has to be renovated, but we're still there. And our goal for these past 26 years has just been to stay, to be open, to continue to tell our stories. And so after 26 years, a lot of exciting things are happening.
For sure. So slow and steady is the way of the Griot.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious because for the folks that have not been there before, it's a wax museum.
It is a Black History museum that uses wax figures as part of its narrative.
Sure.
And actually, we started out when we opened with the name, some really crazy name, like Black World History Wax Museum, which was a misnomer because we weren't telling stories of the whole world. We were trying to tell stories of Black people, the world of Black people. But we used wax figures because that was our hook. That was the way to get people in. We were in St. Louis. And, as much as St. Louis likes to disavow it, St. Louis is still pretty much a southern state with some pretty archaic thoughts. And so we knew that implementing a Black history museum in this city was not going to be easy. So you better have something to get people there. And so we used the wax figures for that. And actually, that was not a mistake because people were very much attracted to the wax figures. I started out with the 6 of them that I kind of fashioned myself. And if you go through the museum now, you can probably identify those that I did from those that other people have done. But again, it was important to get the museum open and to be able to tell those stories and to make sure that people were going to come. And that's why we used wax figures.
So real quick to touch on that a little bit more. So whose stories might you see, for an example, going to the museum?
You'll see a little bit about Mackler Shepherd, who is in a neighborhood not far from here called Jeff Vanderloo. He noted his story basically is that he and many of our St. Louis neighborhoods have been displaced, wiped out, gentrified, no longer exist. And when that movement was coming to JVL, Mackler and some of his and the other residents came together, united, and fought to save their neighborhood. And so Jeff Vanderloo still exists because of that initial effort on the part of just some grassroots residents who wanted to fight for their neighborhood. So we tell his story and the story of his support from his wife and the family and residents in the neighborhood. In fact, I start out with that maybe by intention, but not really by intention. But tomorrow, if you have nothing to do at the Griot, we are featuring some of the stories of JVL, Jeff Vanderloo residents at the Griot. They will be talking about their experience, their lives in Jeff Vanderloo, some of whom still reside in the area, some of whom no longer reside in the area but serve on the board and continue to have an active role in the neighborhood. So if you're not doing anything tomorrow at 11, I believe, come by the Griot. That's another excuse for you to come visit the Griot. But you'll also see people like Percy Green, who many of us will know. Many people will not know him personally, but if you're a St. Louisan, you probably know him most for the story that surrounds him as he climbs the arch as it's kind of midway completion and stops work on it because they have no black employees on the arch. And he stays there until they at least tell them that they're going to begin to hire some African-American workers. So his story is there. Josephine Baker is there, George Washington Carver, which was, for me, was a revelation that when people started to come in the museum, even if they knew the name George Washington Carver, they had no idea that George Washington Carver was from Missouri. And so, it kind of gives you a special delight when you are able to reveal those kinds of stories. There's a lady in the museum called Elizabeth Keckley, who was an enslaved person here in St. Louis, she was a seamstress, excellent seamstress, ends up buying her freedom and that of her son, makes her way to Washington, D.C. via Baltimore, becomes the personal seamstress for Mary Todd Lincoln, who was the wife of President Abraham Lincoln. And it is said that she actually designed and sewed the gown that Mary Todd Lincoln wore during the inauguration. So those are the kind of stories. And I guess I'll back up and say we try to highlight those stories of people who have a St. Louis or regional connection, but we can also connect them to the bigger national story. And so that keeps us from just being very parochial, but making the connection that black folks are everywhere, and black folks, there is a continuity among us that does not end. Mm-hmm. The stories do not end, we're everywhere.
Right, and I think also to add to that continuity standpoint, whether it's individuals that lived in St. Louis or even crossed through for some time, is that the things that happen in St. Louis matter.
Absolutely.
Not just for the people that are, when we're thinking about it from a local standpoint of what you're saying, but even from a national standpoint, whether it be the Ferguson movement being more of a contemporary and current story as well, too.
Yeah, St. Louis is probably one of the most important places in history because so many of the things that happen in St. Louis have impacted the nation. Even as I speak about Percy Green, he's most noted, if you know him at all, about his, going up the arch. But there is another part of the story about Percy Green where he files suit against McDonnell Douglas, and that becomes a landmark case in employment discrimination that is still used to this day for people who have issues with employment. But we don't talk about those stories, right. But that had national and sometimes international impact. So a lot of those kinds of things happened here in St. Louis.
Right. And so as you all are really centering those voices, I'm really curious on, as the Griot is moving forward, how are you all thinking about, I guess, especially as you touched on earlier, as the economic landscape is changing and as corridors are expanding in St. Louis as well, too, how are you all thinking about, I guess, the centering of not only just black voices, but minority voices here in St. Louis as all these changes are happening?
I think we've always been focused on that. It's always been a part of what inspires us to do the work we do, whether it's in providing opportunities for artists to work or to showcase or to just have a space where they feel comfortable exhibiting, because sometimes artists in our community aren't always well received in mainstream organizations. And so we think of the Griot as a place where they can do that, where you can experiment, where you can feel safe in doing kind of out-of-the-box things, and maybe where we think the standard of work is excellent. And it usually is, almost always is. Some other major institutions don't, and so that work may never get seen. So we think that's an important role that we play. We also understand that, the historical narrative around not funding us is us, by us I mean organizations of color and artists of color and people of color in general in their pursuits. That's a real thing, and it's still real. It has changed somewhat, and it is changing a little bit more, particularly after the George Floyd incident, the Michael Brown, and now we have Juneteenth, and so there's a level, somewhat higher level of consciousness around the value of art and creativity that emanates from people of color. So I think that's a good thing for us.
For sure. And to touch on something that you said about, the exciting work that you all are having, within the Griot, you also have some really exciting work that's happening outside the Griot as well, too. So do you want to just, speak to the work of David Adjaye and Alsace 3 and really what that means not only just for St. Louis, but what it means also for placemaking here in St. Louis as well?
Yeah. This is probably one of the, well, first of all, you have to tell you that I never thought about being a museum professional. I never thought about founding a museum. I was not a little girl who said, when I grow up, I want to run a museum. Never, ever in my life. So this is one of those other things that I never, ever, ever would have thought of happening, that we would have any kind of association with someone like David Adjaye. In fact, it's interesting. I think I met David Adjaye for the first time in this space many, many years ago, and that was it. He probably didn't remember me from Adam.
Real quick, just for everybody that may not know who David Adjaye is.
I'm going to tell them.
Okay, yeah, I know you got it.
I got to build it up. I got to get a build up here. So probably 5 years ago, pre-COVID, I worked with David McNally at Counterpublic for their first triennial about an art exhibit an outdoor public art exhibit. And we worked a little bit after that. We when the actual formal exhibit closed, we had a part of that exhibit on display at the Griot. But throughout that process, James and I decided that we were building a relationship, and we decided we wanted to do some other things together. And he talked about the next Counterpublic, which would be 3 years after 2019, and asked if the Griot would like to participate. And I said, of course. And neither of us at that point had any idea what that would look like, what it would be, but we knew we wanted to do something. And so when COVID started to lift a bit, and he revisited the idea of 23, Counterpublic 23, we talked about it. And he said, you still want to be involved? And I said, well, yeah, of course. And he said, well, how would you like to be involved? How about you be, the Griot be the northern anchor for the project? And I said, okay, of course. Well, after several months we talked, and there was time to decide who would be the artist at the Griot, and we didn't still know. He asked me who we thought that should be, and I thought it'd be great if we could get some really national, really important person. And so David Adjaye's name came up, because I remember having met him here, and he wasn't bothered by it. He wasn't the least bit moved. He said, oh, yeah, well, sure, why not? Let's talk about it. And then he brought on a curator, Allison Glenn, who actually had worked with the David Adjaye team. David Adjaye, in case you don't know, has anybody ever been to the African American Museum of History and Culture on the Mall at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.? Yay.
We need to
David
get some more
Adjaye
hands.
is the designer of that structure. So, several conversations later, Allison said, David Adjaye's team is actually interested in the project. We just got to get the team to convince David to be interested in the project. And several months later, they said, David Adjaye is interested in your project. He might want to do something at the Griot. And then a couple months later, they called and said, guess what? David Adjaye has a one-day layover between going from, I don't know, New York to London or somewhere. And he's willing to stop in St. Louis to visit with you. And I went like, yes. And so he came. And that day he came, we talked. He was here for about 3 hours, and we went through the space. I talked about our vision, talked about our history, talked about what we'd like to see. And he went away, didn't say anything except shook his head and yeah. And then we got a call back that said, guess what? David Adjaye wants to do your project. He's going to do a project at the Griot. And I was like, yes. Still, he had no idea what it would be, but he had begun to do these sculptures that he called, and ours is Asase 3. He'd done 2 others. Each of them had been indoors. He had never done an outdoor sculpture, so he wanted to try. He has to tell you about it, but his inspiration once he was in the space at the Griot was that he wanted to do it outdoors. And he will have to explain to you what that inspiration was. And so we have this space that he kind of envisioned. Asase 1 and 2 are kind of circular, like this. Ours is long. What is that word? Long. So it stretches the whole length of our building. It is currently being built, and it's made out of what they call rammed earth. And it's a beautiful structure. I wish you could see my phone. They just took the first sample of it yesterday. And now it's almost as hard as this floor. But it's earth. It's a combination of stuff, soil and brick and limestone and things that actually were dug up in the ground around the museum and various areas throughout St. Louis. Asase means earth, and it's kind of a mythical figure. The icon people honor because of its relationship to the earth and to giving back and to nurturing and to women and health and all those things. So we're really excited about it. He was here on April 15th to give us a preview of it. It went really well. People were really excited about it. I can tell you, as you talk about the economy related to art and placement of the works of people of color, this project has brought more attention to the Griot than anything we've done in 25 years. And it's brought people to the Griot that have never and would never have ever come to the Griot. And overtures have been made for support of projects that I've been trying to get funded for 25 years, you know. So if you say that there's no money in St. Louis, that's just not true. It just depends on where people want to spend their money. And what they want to support. But I think that if had it not been for this project, we would still be struggling. And we're still struggling because, I mean, the project is funded, didn't bring any money directly to us, but there will be some things, some offshoots of that we will benefit from. So I talked way too long on that.
It's all good. And it's exciting to just be able to see, you know, the different sculpture and placemaking work that's happening in St. Louis, whether it be what's happening at the Griot, Damon Davis's work that's down at the MLS Stadium. You know, that is a stand-in or monument, as at least the way that I think about it, of the Mill Creek neighborhood as well.
It's beautiful.
And so I guess, you know, when you think of yourself, you know, well, not think of yourself, you are a Griot. How does it, being a former, I guess, resident of Mill Creek Valley, really begin to shape the way that you tell the story? Because for some people, they don't know the story of Mill Creek and how we've gotten to what we know St. Louis to even be today.
Yeah, I think for me, I lived in Mill Creek I was born in Mill Creek, and I lived there until 1961, which was really much later than the actual, by the time we moved in 61, we may have been the only people there, because by that time there was no water, no lights, nothing, no public utilities. And I think for about all practical purposes, the neighborhood was gone. So to be able to go back and see something like a Damon Davis sculpture that recognizes and honors the history of the Mill Creek and the people who lived there. I mean, you know, you can always tear down buildings and you can destroy buildings, but you can't destroy people and you can't destroy the meanings that those neighborhoods hold for you. And so I am always drawn back to Mill Creek. I guess I went back to Mill Creek, and my daughter went to high school. I went to elementary school there. I graduated from Bashan High School. I lived in what at that point was Midtown Redevelopment. No, I've forgotten the name of, just east of what used to be Laclede Town. They had a different name. So I stayed in the neighborhood for a long, long time. Whenever I hear the name Mill Creek, it always brings back special memories for me. To be able to tell stories of other people who lived in various other neighborhoods, to make those connections in what we do at the Griot is just very important for me. And I just try to keep that always at the forefront.
For sure. And I think to what you're saying is thinking of the stories and the people. I think that's a large part of, when me and Trey are, really thinking about what does Speak Up St. Louis, how do we make sure that we're elevating the voices of folks that people know, but also sharing stories that people may not know as well too. So it's also kind of the archival process for us as well. And so to be able to hear how you have this deep connection with the community and the people of St. Louis and being able to share that with us, we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And just how you're able to not only who you are as a person, but also the work that you're doing with the Griot to make sure that these stories are being housed, archived, and shared for the next generation as well too.
Yeah, one of it is much like what you're doing. We will be archiving oral histories as well. From people, particularly like tomorrow, we'll be archiving that as well, and looking at a really concerted effort to get those stories of some of those people who have been displaced, so that folks, when we have sessions like this, folks can know. One of the things I always get really perturbed about is when they say, where'd you grow up? And I say Mill Creek, and they say, well, where is that? And I go like, it's right there where St. Louis University and Harris Stowe and all those places are. But I want us to get to a point where when we say Mill Creek, they don't have to say, where is that? Or when we say JVL, they don't have to say, well, where is that? That they will know, and they will know about the people and the stories of those neighborhoods.
Right. Because we have champions in those neighborhoods for generations that have been able to really, despite what larger mass media says about St. Louis, that have been holding it down for years.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important to be able to honor and respect not only that past, but also being able to understand where we're going as a whole. And so I think the work that's happening up at Griot is just the beginning, 26 years to the starting line, and now here we are again.
I want it to keep going beyond me, but I don't want to do it for another 26 years. Anybody out there want to run a museum?
Passing the baton on the episode.
Yeah, I do want to be able to enjoy some of the good times. I want to be able to enjoy it when there's not so much struggle. On the other hand, that struggle has given me a certain kind of strength, a certain kind of power, a certain kind of drive to want to see things happen and make sure they happen, and a kind of inspiration to keep fighting, that it's not over yet.
Definitely.
Yeah. And
so as we wrap up, we have a question that we ask all of our guests on the podcast. It's a two-part question. It's not that hard. You've been doing great up to this point. So it's a two-part question. One, what do you love most about St. Louis? And the second part is, what do you most want to see change?
I think what I really love most about it is all the things I complain about. All of the racism, all of the bigotry, all of the, obstacles you have to face. But you have to face them, and being able to face them, and then being even able to come up with a solution. Without the struggles, there are no successes. And so, but I love St. Louis. I mean, with all of its warts and bumps and stuff, I love St. Louis.
And potholes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's those things that make you strong, because you've got to find a way to navigate through it. And if you're tough, you do, and you come out on top. And the other part is,
what do you most want to see change?
Oh gosh, a little bit more acceptance of who people are, a little bit more humanity, a little more acceptance of who we are as human beings, and not have anything to do with who we are, what the colors of our skin, or what our sexual preference or orientation. None of that should really matter, because the bottom line is we're all humans, and I would like to see us embrace that more than I think we have done in the past. I think we're doing better about it, but I think we still have a long way to go.
For sure. And I think with the work that you all are doing up at the Griot over in North St. Louis, it's just the beginning. To be able to find a way to be able to connect all this work that's happening around St. Louis together to really be able to take that next step forward.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Lois, for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.